Hello? Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Fast Mayday, what's your location? Get the panel out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, baby. Water in that 2.5 inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5 inch line. To the rope, to the rope, 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we talk about firefighter and paramedic line of duty deaths to learn from these tragic events and potentially prevent them from happening again in the future. I'm your host, Paul, and I'm joined today by my regular co-hosts, Doug and Denis. And we also have a special guest host who's guest hosted with us before is Gordon Routley from the City of Montreal. And he's going to join us to talk about this week's incident, of which he ended up being intimately involved way back in 1991 as an investigator to investigate what happened. So, Denis, how's it going, you guys? Hey, Denis, how's it going? What's happening?
It's going fine. We got a little gang coming in on Sunday. We have something we call a First Cousins Club, which is basically relatives on my mother's side for the most part, although we do have a cousins club on my dad's side. So my mother's family. So we have 31 people coming to dinner on Sunday. So
Nice. I didn't get my invite, but I'm on your dad's side, so.
Well, there's the staff side and the distaff side. So you know which side you're on.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a potluck, and we're doing a ham and a big casserole because in my theory is you need to have a few things there that you can recognize, because otherwise you're going around we got this giant size island. You're going around the island deciding what you want to eat out of what pot, and there's lots of this. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Sounds like a lot of good food to me, I'm sure.
Yeah. So when you get to the ham, you go, I know what that is.
Nice.
Make the choice. Yeah, and then of course, being a maritimer and all, half the counter's taken up with desserts. So just saying.
Perfect. Sugar high. Yeah. Nice. And you got your siding. You got your siding replaced, I heard, from the wildfire in May or June.
Yeah, 6 months it took for the guy to finally show up. So they said, well, it'll take 10 days. The guy did it in 3 by himself. Sided half my house by himself.
Wow, nice. He's done it before.
0-degree weather with a heavy wind blowing. He did it all by himself. He did a nice job. I'm happy with it. Of course, after any time I get any work done on my house, I have this big magnet on a stick I go around with.
Yes.
So I have enough nails now to build another house, but that's another story.
Now hang on. I sold fire trucks to you, and you said you're happy with it. So that is a big compliment coming from Denis Prevost. Yeah.
Merci, mon ami.
Doug, what's new?
Oh yeah, hey Paul. Not much is new. Just busy with taking one kid here and this kid there, and the dog over here, and my wife's taking people places and going to work and doing whatever. So busy running around. And we had no snow in November for the first time ever this year, and finally got some last night, and now it's above 0 today, so everything's all a nice soupy mess. But it's happy to have a little bit of downtime to chat fire stuff here. But,
Perfect. Good. Excellent. And Gordon, newly retired.
Yeah.
Ripe age of 70-something.
73.
73. Way to go, man. Just retired. He's sitting in the easy chair and going to join us for this podcast. He must have enjoyed his last couple of times with us. We did, which ones did we do now? We did Charleston.
Yeah.
And what was the other one? Seattle with you. Those terrible incidents. And so we've invited you back for more, and you came.
Yeah. I enjoyed talking about those cases. All sad cases, but all interesting with lots of lessons. So I enjoy sharing the information.
Maybe it's Gordon. Do you have a lady in the background?
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull
Okay.
this off.
So how's retired life treating you, Chief?
Well, it takes getting used to. My head is still firmly planted in the fire department. It's just I don't take my body there every day. I'm dealing with the big challenges like figuring out what to wear every day.
I
Um,
know, uniform.
New uniform, yeah, yeah,
Which blue shirt am I going to wear today?
yeah, yeah,
Took me several years. I opened my closet, and all there was uniforms.
That's right.
yeah, yeah. And other challenges, like straightening out my home office since I've been, since I wasn't using the home office for the last 15 years. There's a lot of stuff accumulated.
I'm using mine, and there's a lot of stuff accumulated.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's get on with the podcast. So, this week's incident that we're going to discuss: 4 volunteer firefighters died when they were trapped by a partial floor collapse during a structure fire in Breckenridge, Pennsylvania, on the morning of December 20th, back in 1991. All 4 were members of a mutual aid truck company that had responded to the early morning incident and were assigned to prevent extension from the basement to the ground floor of a 2-story building. Although they were wearing full protective clothing and using SCBA, it appears they were overwhelmed by severe fire conditions that erupted when a section of the ground floor collapsed into the basement. The collapse cut off their primary escape path, and the fire burned through their hose line, leaving them without protection from the flames. This report, and part of the reason why Gordon has joined us today, is he went down there. It was contracted by the U.S. Fire Administration, I think, or
Yeah,
NFPA. Which was it?
it was U.S. Fire Administration.
To investigate this line of duty deaths. This was before NIOSH routinely did investigations on every LODD. So
Yeah, that was, I guess, NIOSH came along about 90, 95, 96. The NIOSH program started up. So before
right,
that, U.S. Fire Administration contracted with me and a couple of other people to do them.
cool. So it's great to have that firsthand knowledge and of the incident. And even though it's an older incident, like Denis and I were talking in the preamble while we were getting online today, there's still lessons that are relevant today. Even though this happened back in '91, unfortunately, some of those same top 5. I was listening to the guys' podcast yesterday or webinar, and they kept relating a lot of incidents to the top 5 Maydays or whatever that from that Mayday project that's going on. So we see some of those same things in this incident again. So
Sad we're not learning.
yeah, it's unfortunate, which is why we do the podcast, hopefully to get it out there. The podcast is growing. We've had a successful year. We grew like 180%. We've doubled our listener base. Still not huge, but it's growing, which is great. And maybe people are liking the information.
Yeah, like and share, like and share.
Maybe we are going to get Blue Card to sponsor us. Maybe we're getting big enough.
Maybe. I was reading a tweet today that said something about don't think you're too small for a sponsor. Just go ahead and seek them out. So
I don't know why
yeah,
they'd sponsor us though when you mention them for free so often.
that's right. Yes. We'll have to start looking into this other incident command training program that a consultant, K. Lamb and Associates, has brought into Ontario, and they're doing a project with the Ontario Fire Chiefs for fire command training. It's I think blended learning with virtual VR as well. So K. Lamb and Associates. I'd like to learn about that. We have to maybe sick Denis on that, or Gordon. You're close to Ontario. You can look into it.
Yeah, that's Catherine Lamb.
That's Catherine Lamb. Do you
Yeah,
know them at
yeah,
all?
yeah, I know Catherine. Yeah,
Okay. So they're doing training for on.
she developed it in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and she was doing. The last time I talked to her, she was doing it in Dubai.
Lots of European customers as well,
Yeah,
Belgium and France and Norway and those countries. And now she got a grant last year from the Ontario Fire Chiefs to pilot it, and now the pilot was successful, and they're going along with it and increasing it. So there's
yeah.
been some ads that don't know anything about it though.
Sounds like I know what Gordon's job in retirement's going to be.
Haha, maybe. He
Yeah,
might have something to do with incident command programs, right, Gordon?
yeah, I have some familiarity.
Since you've got fingers in the pie of the original Blue Card Fire Command,
Yeah,
that's what you went to Phoenix, right? With what was that guy's name? Had a funny name. The deputy chief in Phoenix.
you mean the guy
Hoot Gibson.
with Hoot? Yeah, well, I worked with Hoot,
Yeah, Hoot Gibson.
and I worked closely with Alan Brunacini
Right.
uh, when the Brunacini brothers were in high school.
Yeah, and Doug likes to bug me because I'm a proponent of the Blue Card training program, just because I like the program and how it's laid out and stuff, and so he teases me about it. But I know that you have roots way back in before Blue Card, before Fire Command, working
Yeah,
with Chief Brunacini and Hoot Gibson in building Phoenix's fire training center. So
yeah, and building
cool.
building all of that stuff and doing some of the groundwork on it. One of the great adventures that I had, I guess it must have been in the early '80s. Bruno sent me to several other cities to study how they did incident command. So that gave me an excuse to spend time in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York City and a few other places, um, studying the way they managed incidents and bringing that together, and taking the good parts and putting that into the Phoenix Incident Command System, which was the beginning of the Blue Card system.
Yeah, Fire Command in action, and then Blue Card. Cool.
I have to go
Okay.
to LA and Chicago and New York to study the fire department. What a tough job to do. Eh? I'd
It,
love
wa-
to go
it
do
was
that.
it was really interesting. The similarities and the differences were just really really amazing.
You went you got a degree in what, fire protection engineering or something like that? That's kind of what opened those doors for you, right?
Yeah, yeah. I did fire protection engineering at the University of Maryland, civil engineering at McGill in Montreal, and then fire protection at the University of Maryland.
And then started to get your name out there and do some contract work and stuff. So there you go, Doug, a degree in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland.
I'll write
You
that
got
down.
relatives. You got relatives down there,
I
don't
do.
you?
I do have. Yeah, I
Yeah,
got relatives in Maryland. Yep.
good.
Okay, let's get
Okay,
back to this
back to the
topic at hand
subject.
here.
Squirrel.
So
Sorry,
the
Denise
the
frowning.
fire.
He's like, come on. All right. So the unfortunate. You want to start? Yeah, go ahead with Breckenridge. I could mention the names just for posterity's sake. So Michael Chalicki Burns, 27 years old. David Emanuelson, 29 years old. Rick France, 23 years old. And Frank Very Jr., 31 years old. And the key part of this is they were volunteers, I believe, from another station. They were called in mutual aid to help with this fire. And so right away the situational awareness might be not there in the command communication and stuff like that.
All right, the fire service organization. So Breckenridge is a community of approximately 4,500 people, located approximately 25 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, next to the Allegheny River. It is protected by the Pioneer Hose Company, which operates two stations necessitated by railroad tracks that divide the community. Each station is equipped with a pumper, which is engine 50 and engine 51, below emergency, and an equipment truck, Rescue 50 and Rescue 51. A van is also provided at Station 50 to transport personnel designated as Squad 50. You got to put that at 51 just to have Squad 51, don't you?
Remember in in Lacombe County, you and I wanted to get a
Yeah,
naming
yeah,
convention with all the stations and all the trucks, and it
yeah.
couldn't be settled because all the 5 stations wanted engine 50 and 51 because of emergency TV show, and it never happened. And they're still
Yeah,
all you've got 5 rescue 1s in the one county. Yep.
yeah.
Anyway,
Anyways, the all volunteer fire company has approximately 30 active firefighting members, supported by a large contingent of auxiliary support and inactive members. An elected fire chief and 2 assistant chiefs are responsible for command functions, and the line officers include a captain and several lieutenants. The surrounding area comprises several contiguous boroughs and townships, protected entirely by volunteer fire companies. The companies protecting neighboring Tarleton Borough include the Highland Hose Company and the Eureka Hose Company. Highland, which is Company 11, operates primarily as a truck company, although their ladder truck was out of service for a major rehabilitation at the time of this incident. The primary truck company tools had been transferred to Special Service Unit 115 while the ladder truck was gone. The company also operates a pumper to provide water supply. Eureka Hose, which is Company 12, operates as the primary rescue and ambulance company for the area. In addition to a rescue pumper, which is Engine 121, this company operates a heavy rescue truck, a squirt or hose wagon, and 2 ambulances. Career employees maintain an advanced life support ambulance service during weekdays when volunteer staffing is limited. The Tarentum Police Department dispatches the Tarentum and Breckenridge fire companies and additional companies in surrounding townships. Harrison Township adjoins Breckenridge to the north and east and is served by 3 volunteer companies, all dispatched by the Harrison Police Department. Hilltop Hose Company of Natrona Heights operates a pumper, Engine 31, an 85-foot tower quint, which is tower or truck 33, an equipment truck, U-34, a personnel carrier, Squad 32. Hilltop was designated to provide truck company service for Breckenridge, while Tarentum's ladder was out of service. The travel distance from the Hilltop station to the fire location is approximately 1 mile. Citizens Hose Company provides ambulance service and engine company service to Harrison Township. Harrison Hills Hose Company provides an additional engine company, while a 4th company was recently withdrawn from service. The communities are located near the intersection of 4 different counties, and mutual aid is available from all surrounding jurisdictions. There are several hundred volunteer companies in the counties surrounding Pittsburgh, each with a strong company identity and local community relationship. Each volunteer company operates autonomously within its first designated area, and the chief of that particular company is the ranking authority for fire and rescue operations.
should maybe Denis or Gordon. I mean, this may be foreign to many Western Canadian, for sure, even Western North American people, as to the layout of Eastern North America and how we have these small local fire companies everywhere, miles apart, and there's like so many of them close together. I don't know if either of you want to talk about that. It's slowly dying off as regionalization comes in and services and amalgamations and stuff. But back in '91, it would be in its heyday.
Yeah, even today, Allegheny County outside of Pittsburgh, I'm trying to remember how many independent volunteer companies there are in Allegheny County, but it seems to me it's in the 70s or maybe close to 80. And each one is an entity unto itself. And most of them cover areas of maybe 1 to 2 square miles. On this particular case, I think there were 4 departments on the first alarm, and nobody responded more than a mile. So, very,
Crazy.
very, very tightly packed and broken up into small territories.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember going to Long Island and there was fire departments every corner.
Southern Ontario is somewhat like that. I mean, even where I was in Niagara region, you could drive from my city to the city next door, and if it wasn't for the sign saying you're now leaving or welcome to, you just plain wouldn't know. And if you're on one of the non-major corridor streets, you frankly wouldn't know. And even a lot of the people who live there don't know. And so, it's up to the dispatcher to figure out where they are. And before computerization, it took an awful lot of local knowledge to have any clue where the call was coming from. So,
Yeah.
and all those departments within small footprints, it sounds like over servicing, and perhaps it was, but with the crowded urban conditions too, you could have some pretty big, burn down the block conflagrations. And I guess, Gord, in this case too, they could have come to that actually, right?
It could have, yeah. But Breckenridge was a pretty tightly packed community. It was an industrial town. I'm trying to remember what factory was just down the street, but most of the people in town were employed by the one factory.
Yeah, it
And
was a steel mill or something. It said in the drawing.
yeah, um, so there's a close affinity, to the 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 big employer in town and the community, and then a close affinity between the fire companies and the community. Um, yeah, most of the volunteers who responded to this call got to their stations on foot. I know that the guys who died were all on Hilltop's ladder company, and you know they were on the road in 2.5 minutes or so after the call came in, and they all responded to the station on foot.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that too. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about the fire building here. And it says the fire building was located in the downtown area of Breckenridge, and I'm not, and fairly close to the river, I believe, eh? In a
Yeah, just
mixed,
a block. Yep.
But yeah,
yeah,
block and a half.
yeah. So this was an area of mixed residential and commercial occupancies. We're talking cities that probably date back 100, 150 years, maybe more, eh?
Yeah,
So, and it was 2 blocks from the Allegheny River. It says most of the structures in the immediate area were of 2 stories in height, and the fire building was one of the larger structures in the immediate area, although much larger industrial buildings were only located a few blocks away. The water supply in the area is limited to between 750 and 1,000 gallons per minute. These are US gallons. So you're probably talking 6-inch mains, that type of a thing, pretty small stuff. And I certainly know that one of the cities, my last city that I was in, uh, we had large industrial properties on 4-inch mains. And
Wow.
if we get an opportunity, I'll tell you a little bit about a big fire we had in a 500,000 square foot rubber factory on 4-inch mains. That was exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this particular building that the fire started in was 2 stories in height. Although I think you'll discover later on that it really was 3 stories on the backside. So, it's one of those
yep,
ones where you stand on the alpha side, looks like a 2-story occupancy, and you stand on the Charlie side and you go, no, it ain't. So that was probably a significant factor in this fire. The vertical building was about 65 feet wide and it was 75 feet deep. So it was deeper than it was wide. It was also on a street corner too. I don't know that it mentions that here, but it is. It was on a corner. The vertical distance between the floors was approximately 12 feet. So you're talking basically an industrial building. And the ground floor at the front of the building was even with the sidewalk. So you walked in on the ground level, which in the back would have been the second story actually, but in the front it was at the ground level. So that's your first floor. The ground slopes downward towards the river on the side street, and at the rear of the building, the basement is approximately about half above grade. So half the foundation is in the ground, and coming back to the front, all of it's in the ground. So at the rear, there was a driveway that slopes down, and sharply to the right of the end of the driveway was a roll-up garage door that provided vehicle access into the basement area. So at one time, the building had served as an automobile dealership, and there had been an interior ramp built that allowed vehicles to be driven from the first floor up to the second floor. And so on the right-hand side of the Alpha side, so in the Alpha Delta corner, there was a roll-up garage door that was on the Alpha side of the building, and you went straight in that door and straight onto the ramp and up towards the second floor. So the ramp had a 90 in it, I think, Gordon, halfway up,
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, toward the top.
Yeah, so there was an additional roll-up door inside the building that provided access from the bottom of the ramp onto the main portion of the ground floor, which served as a showroom. So your ground floor as you walked in was an automotive showroom at the time, and in the Alpha Delta corner there was a ramp that went backwards towards the Charlie side and then ended up eventually upstairs on the second floor on the Charlie side. So construction details indicated that the ramp was not part of the original construction, so it was added afterwards. The upper floor was originally used as a roller skating arena and became part of the automobile dealership at a later date after the construction of the building. When the ramp was installed, there were stairs to the second floor that were removed, so the ramp replaced the stairs, which left the ramp as the only access to the upper level. No other way to get up there. You had to walk up and down the ramp. Had a building similar to that um, that was used as a call center, and it was quite a nightmare to get around in. It was 4 floors, all with ramps. Anyway, an enclosed stairway near the center of the building connected the basement with the ground floor. So when you walked in on the ground floor, there was in the middle of the floor, there was a set of stairs that went downstairs to the basement. So there was a set of renovation plans that were dated 1980, and it indicated there were a set of double exit doors that discharged from the ground floor level at the rear of the building. So that would have been in the Charlie Delta corner. This may have been the original exit discharge from the upper floor. These doors were located in the corner and were underneath the automobile ramp, could only be reached by walking under the ramp through an area with low overhead clearance. When a change of occupancy occurred, the exterior exhaust shaft for the basement spray booths, this was a furniture renovation company, so they built ducts and booths, and these ducts went up the outside of the building, but they were installed directly in front of these doors, which permanently eliminated this exit. So there's no exit from the ground floor besides the door you came in and a door that went down to the basement through a set of stairs. That's it. That's all there was, ignoring the roll-up door. When a change of occupancy occurred, then this exit was permanently blocked. So there was a resident building to the rear. So in other words, behind the Charlie side of the building, there was another building that was an architectural match to the fire building. And there had been a bridge connecting the ground floor of the fire building to the second story of this other building behind, and that provided access from the owner's apartment in this building behind on the Charlie side over to the ground floor of the fire building. All that remained of that ramp was 2 steel beams that spanned this rear sloping driveway and that connected the ground floor of the fire building to the second floor of the building at the rear. The bridge and the door that provided access to it had been removed, so there was no passage back and forth. So that was a possible exit at one time, but not in this case. So there were no exterior stairs or fire escapes at all on the building, and the building did not contain a fire alarm. That's important. Nor a detection system, nor a sprinkler system. The only exterior access to the ground floor was at the front of the building on the Alpha side, and the only exterior access to the basement was at the rear. There was no exterior access to the second floor. An interior stairway near the center of the building linked the basement and the ground levels, as I already mentioned. The basement foundation walls were poured concrete, and the exterior walls above grade level were brick over terracotta tile construction. You see that a lot in older industrial buildings. They double width of terracotta and then they face it off with brick because the terracotta is porous. A portion of the basement was separated. So you end up with a wall that's 18 inches thick, Gordon? Something like that. Quite thick, eh?
More than a foot anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of those over time, and they're pretty substantial. A portion of the basement was separated from the main area of the basement by brick walls, and that served as a boiler room. So there was this other separate room in the basement, and that was in the Beta Charlie corner, although it was no longer used in the capacity as a boiler room. Natural gas and electric heating units had replaced the old central furnace at some point in the building's history. And why that's important is I think one of the causes later on we'll see could have been an electric heating unit. So the floors were concrete. The first floor surface was finished with terrazzo, which is those tiles, and tile in different areas, and the upper floor surface had been covered with wood. So a lot of weight there.
Yeah. So the occupancy initially, or in the end, at the time of the fire, housed the West Interior Services, a company that specialized in the restoration and refinishing of furniture. The front part of the ground floor had been converted to offices, and the large showroom windows had been replaced by smaller window assemblies. The ramp to the second floor remained in place, and the upper level was used for storage. All the production facilities were located in the basement. So the first floor on the Charlie side, second floor, or not accessible from the Alpha side. A stripping operation was located towards the rear with 3 dip vats containing solvents and neutralizers that were used to remove old finishes from wood furniture. Thermostatically controlled immersion heaters were installed to keep the contents of the vats at their proper temperatures. 30 by 30 finishing room was constructed at the front part of the basement to provide a clean environment to apply finishes and to contain the flammable vapors. 2 spray booths were installed in this area and were vented to the exterior by an exhaust system. The exhaust duct carried away spray vapors to the rear of the building that extended up the exterior to discharge at the roof level, and an additional exhaust fan was installed at the rear exterior of the building to move the exhausted vapors up to the point of discharge. The finishing room walls were constructed of gypsum wallboard on wood studs framed into the building structure, and air intake filters were installed on one of the walls to provide makeup air while the spray booth exhaust system was operating. A set of double doors allowed for large pieces of furniture to be moved in and out of the finishing room. There were shelves inside the finishing room, providing for finished products, primarily 1 and 5 gallon metal containers, finishing products in 1 and 5 gallon metal containers, including lacquers and lacquer thinners. A considerable quantity of aerosol containers of touch-up and special finish materials was also kept on a set of shelves in one corner of the room. Other materials used in the finishing process were stored on shelves and cabinets in the room. Of course, you can't store your supplies in the production area anymore for fire code, but this was maybe before that. The self-closing rag container was provided in the room. An area just outside the double doors was provided with 35 and 55 gallon drums of flammable liquids, which were connected to a grounding system for spark abatement. The liquids from these containers were dispensed into smaller containers for use in the finishing room and other areas. Several other drums containing flammable and non-flammable products were stored in the basement and also an exterior storage area at the bottom of the rear driveway. The remainder of the basement was used for woodworking and storage. A rack in one corner was used to store lumber for repair jobs. The area between the finishing room and the roll-up doors was a shipping and receiving area where the finished jobs were staged for shipment and newly arrived pieces were unloaded. The entire basement was cluttered with woodworking equipment, work in progress, materials in transit, and miscellaneous storage. Any comments, Gordon, on the building itself from that summary?
Yeah, the building was interesting. Again, it had been there for quite a while. It had changed occupancies several times. Um, the the key points were the woodworking and refinishing shop in the basement, which had a lot of combustibles in it, and the storage of the combustibles. If you went through the roll up door on the Charlie side, which was the access into the basement, all the way to the opposite end of the basement was where all the flammable liquids were stored, which when you go up to the ground floor would have been directly below the front entrance. When you walked in the front door from the sidewalk, that storage room would have been, right below you, the first 10 feet going into the building on the ground floor. And that's where most of the fire was. Um, and with the changing use of the building, uh, originally it was pretty lightweight construction supporting the ground floor, but they had refinished it with concrete when it became an auto dealer. Then they refinished it again with terrazzo at some point. So it was a pretty heavy floor sitting on a very lightweight steel uh, structure that held that up. So that point gets to be important as we go along talking about the fire.
Speaking of the fire originated in the basement finishing room, which is directly below the front entrance. The investigation indicates that the cause was most likely an accumulation of the overspray residue that was ignited by the electric heating unit. The alternative possibility of spontaneous ignition of chemicals used in the room could not be eliminated. The actual time of ignition is believed to have been as long as several hours before discovery. Investigators believe that the fire may have smoldered for several hours and may have gone through the repeated stages of flaming and smoldering combustion, limited by the ventilation that was available to sustain flaming combustion. Between midnight and 0100 hours, neighbors had reported a strong odor of smoke in the area, and members of the Pioneer Hose Company who were at the station had looked for a source, concluding that it was coming from a wood stove. The temperature was approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with no wind, and many wood stoves were in use in the neighborhood. One witness later reported that visible smoke had been coming from either the chimney or the basement exhaust duct, but this was not observed by firefighters who checked the area. Around 0200 hours, another call was received by the communications center, and a police car was sent to check the area, but the officer found nothing unusual. The fire was discovered by the first employee reporting for work on the morning of December 20th, 1991. The employee discovered smoke immediately upon opening the front door, then went to the rear and observed smoke in the basement. The employee knocked on the door of the residential building to the rear and asked the resident to call the fire department. The Tarentum Police Dispatch Center received the call at 0545 hours, reporting smoke in the building.
Yeah, I should add that the fire station for Breckenridge, Pioneer Hose Company, was about 150 feet from the fire building.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the initial response. So it's interesting that the fire station was across the street and like 2 buildings down. So it was pretty handy. So the Tarentum dispatcher activated the tones to notify the Pioneer members, which is the station we're talking about, on the same street pretty much, of the alarm at 0546 hours. So pretty early in the morning. The Pioneer chief, who lived less than a block from the scene, was first to arrive and gave an arrival report of smoke showing. And he gave that report at 0547, so 1 minute after the tones. He immediately requested the response of Hilltop Hose Company for their ladder truck. Remember, Hilltop was about, a mile away, I think, Gordon, you wrote in the report?
Yeah. Yep.
This request was relayed from the Tarentum dispatcher to the Harrison dispatcher, and then out to the company through tones, activated at 0549. So that took 2 minutes. One of the first Pioneer firefighters to arrive at the station, dressed in his full PPE, picked up an SCBA and a forcible entry tool and responded to the front of the fire building on foot. At this time, light smoke was coming from the front door. So he walked right past the rear alley of the Charlie side, all the way up the Beta side of the building, turned left to the Alpha side of the building, which is the front door. At this time, light smoke was coming out of that front door, and because the door had been opened by the employee who discovered the smoke in the building. As the firefighter stopped outside the doorway to don his face piece, he noted that the floor was too hot to touch with a gloved hand, and he could feel it through the knee pads of his turnout pants. That's pretty warm. He concluded that the fire must be in the basement and went around to meet the crew that was arriving with engine 50. The fire chief directed engine 50 to lay a 5-inch supply line from the hydrant next to the station, so next to the fire hall, up to the fire building. So, a few lengths of hose. 5-inch. That's a big hose for 91. Not unheard of, but
That's
big
pretty
hose.
progressive for 91. That's kudos.
It is good for them. Probably bigger than the lines under the ground. This was done as soon as sufficient members, so they laid out that line as soon as sufficient members had arrived to respond with the engine company crew. Engine 51 was responding from the second station, which was right up the same street, the other side of the railway track. So I don't know if it was half a mile away or whatever.
Not even half a
And
mile. Yeah.
yeah, pretty close, eh?
Yeah.
And arrived slightly after engine 50. So a similar type turnout, volunteers again, early in the morning, should have been lots of folks around. The fire chief directed engine 51 to lay an additional 5-inch supply line from a different hydrant that was on their direction of approach. So they picked up a hydrant in front of the fire hall and laid north, and 51 coming in laid south, met at the fire building. As engine 51 arrived, one of the crew members noted heavy smoke coming from a chimney at the rear and suspected that the problem could be a chimney fire. That was probably, Gordon, the exhaust vent, not a chimney, was it? It was where the smoke was coming
It was
from.
either the exhaust vent or the original chimney from the building, because the original heating system had been taken out. There had been
Right.
probably a coal-fired boiler in the
Right.
basement,
Because
and the chimney was still
I'm
there.
just relating this to a comment you made earlier where they broke windows out, which we haven't gotten to, and got no smoke out of the furnace room. So
Yeah.
I wonder if that was a clue as to where the fire was. Anyways, and they suspected the problem could be a chimney fire, because obviously they didn't know what that first firefighter had seen. Additional members responded on the rescue trucks from each station, so 2 rescue trucks, one from 50, one from 51. So Squad 51 came.
Squad 51, Johnny and Roy. Here we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, of course, they're not putting the fire out because they're paramedics. All right. The interior operation, so Engine 50's crew opened the rear door and extended a 2-inch attack line down the 5 steps into the basement. They encountered a 2-inch attack line. These guys are heavy hitters for 1991. It's like Edmonton used to run some 2-inch and some 3-inch hoses instead of 2.5.
2-inch used to be quite popular in the Northeast. I don't know if it still is,
Yeah.
but it was definitely a popular size. It was
Yeah.
like a compromise, right, Gordon? Better than an inch and a half, lighter than a 2.5.
Right.
Yeah.
Still double jacket hose, likely
Yeah.
double jacket.
They led the attack line down 5 steps, just a little bit down below grade at the rear, and encountered moderate smoke and heat, but no visible fire. They were able to walk upright and navigate with headlights, although their vision was extremely limited by the smoke. The line was advanced approximately 50 feet into the basement as they worked their way around to the stripping vats and furniture. Hilltop's Truck 33 was en route with a 7-member crew and was requesting approach directions from the Pioneer Chief by 05:55 hours. Truck 33 was directed to the front of the fire building, Alpha side, and was on scene by 5:59 hours. The crew included Hilltop Assistant Chief, the company's second lieutenant, who were brothers, and 5 additional members. The Hilltop Chief responded on Engine 31 with a 6-member crew, approximately 3 minutes behind the ladder truck. Pioneer's 2 assistant chiefs, C5 and C53, also arrived at the front of the building and conferred with their chief. One of the assistant chiefs assumed responsibility for interior operations on the ground floor and made an entry with the building owner to unlock doors. The owner, who had responded from his home, was a former volunteer firefighter and reported that he was able to enter and briefly walk around on the ground floor at the time between 05:55 and 0600 hours. Although smoke was strong respiratory irritant, they were able to walk around. On arrival, Truck 33 was requested to provide an interior entry team for the ground floor. The lieutenant and 3 firefighters donned 4 SCBAs and that are carried on the truck and reported to Chief 53 at the front door. Before entering, the lieutenant and the Hilltop assistant chief switched their portable radios to a tactical radio channel because of the heavy traffic on the main channel with the responding units and such. This placed them on a separate channel from the other units at the scene of the fire. The entry team advanced a 2-inch attack line into the interior, accompanied by 2 crew members from Engine 51 to search for signs of the fire. The remaining members of Truck 33's crew remained outside and were joined by Engine 31's crew. The Pioneer chief assigned them to perform ventilation by breaking a window on the second floor at the front of the building. At this point, 06:05 hours, arriving members noted a considerable amount of smoke coming from all the openings in the building, although it did not appear to look particularly hot or thick. The Pioneer Assistant Chief C5 assumed responsibilities for operations at the rear, the Charlie side of the building. When he surveyed conditions from the basement door, he was concerned with the increasing smoke conditions and the fact that the attack line crew could not locate the seat of the fire. He was also concerned with crew accountability as he had some difficulty making contact with Captain 50, who was inside the basement trying to open up the overhead door. Attempts to open the roll-up door for ventilation were unsuccessful. He directed the crew to back out the line out of the basement until ventilation could be accomplished.
Yeah, one of the real key issues here is go back to that first firefighter who showed up on foot. He got to the firehouse before anybody else, so he got dressed, took an SCBA and a tool, and went to the front door. And the chief was already there. Well, that individual saw what was going on, felt the heat, recognized that the fire must be in the basement. So he left the front of the building, went around and met the engine crew that was just coming out of the firehouse. And then he became the nozzle person taking the attack line into the basement. Well, he never said anything to anybody else about what he'd observed at the front of the building. So we had the fire chief at the front who didn't know that the fire was in the basement. They were doing explorations into the ground floor looking for the fire. Meanwhile, from the back of the building, it was pretty evident that the fire was in the basement. They were going in. Again, lots of smoke, but they couldn't find the fire. But the guys at the back of the building were pretty sure they were dealing with a basement fire. The guys at the front of the building had no idea that they were dealing with a basement fire.
This is back in the days when not everybody had a radio, I'm assuming, because some of the comments later on say there's a bunch of guys and one guy had a radio. So was that pretty much the case?
Yeah, generally the officers had radios, but not the firefighters.
Right.
The kind of similar to that Pang fire, same kind of thing, right? The building with the confusion over which level, and we're looking for the fire, and we're on top of the fire, and they didn't know it. Yeah. And
Buildings of this configuration are firefighter killers. I'm telling you, they are. We can find lots of examples of that.
Well, the next one we're going to do in December too, the Chicago one, same thing. And they also everybody did not have a radio, even in 2010. So 20 years later.
Yeah, I had a fire in a similar building. If we get a chance, I'll talk about that a little bit. But the different levels are quite a challenge, especially when you don't have full situational awareness.
That's the key.
Yeah, I investigated a whole series of firefighter fatality incidents with similar situations where the firefighters were above the fire and didn't recognize it.
That's a dangerous place to be, that's for sure, especially when you don't even know it.
Yeah.
So for mutual aid, the Eureka and Highland Hose companies were requested for mutual aid at 0600 and 0601 hours, respectively. Eureka's engine 121 was requested to provide a water supply for engine 50 when it was found that their hydrant was inoperative. A medic unit had already been requested from Eureka to stand by at the scene. The second request brought 5 members on engine 121, followed by 4 members on the rescue truck and Eureka's chief. Engine 121 was assigned to extend engine 50's line to another hydrant. This hydrant was also found to be inoperative, and the line had to be extended 400 feet to a third hydrant to finally obtain a water supply. This was completed at 06:17 hours, which was 30 minutes after the first unit arrived on scene. Engine 51 also had problems with their supply line, had to shut down their hydrant and reconnect the quarter turn coupling that disengaged from the pumper when the line was charged. Although both pumps had problems with their supply lines, they were able to charge the attack lines with tank water and had both corrected the problems before any of the attack line crews encountered the fire. Highland Special Service 115 was requested to provide additional truck company capability and responded with 7 members. At 06:11 hours, Chief 5 requested that Special Service 115's crew to assist with forcible entry on the roll-up door at the rear of the building.
This was Stort's couplings before the locks on them.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that, because I know the first ones that we got, they were like that. So you
Yep.
learn to lay the hose out properly. Make sure, if anything, it's got a half turn to the left, not a
Yeah.
half turn to the right, because when it charged, it would help to lock it on as opposed to come apart.
Yeah.
So,
And
I
you
got
can
a good-
imagine that the turmoil that was going on outside having to do with the supply lines. That was drawing a lot of command attention.
Yeah,
2
3
frozen-
hydrants, no water. Yeah.
They were frozen, right, Gord? I think later on
Yeah.
you find this out there.
Yeah, the two hydrants on the basically the north side of the building were frozen, and so that was a huge distraction for command dealing with the water supply issues.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about some of the changing conditions at the fire. So as I read this, think about oxygen limited fires, because you have a fire in the basement inside, as it turns out to be inside another enclosure in the basement. And the building has been opened up on the second floor. It's opened up on the first floor. It's opened up on the basement. And so up until that point, you had an oxygen limited fire. So think about that as I read through these conditions. By the time the Highland crew was requested to cut the door, which was the garage roll-up door at the basement on the Charlie side, the smoke conditions in the basement had begun to change significantly. Chief 5, who was the chief at the front, I thought, advised the fire chief at 06:11 hours that the fire in the basement was becoming more serious and that the basement looked as if it might light up. So you're getting that dark carbony smoke pouring out. He was planning to cut the roll-up door to accomplish ventilation of the basement. So he managed to communicate that to the chief in charge.
Yeah, he
2
was the
minutes
deputy
later-
chief. Yeah, he was the deputy chief at the rear, and the chief was still at the front.
Right. So he was on the Charlie side and the chief was still on the Alpha side. Right. 2 minutes later, 06:13, the deputy advised the chief that he could hear the fire building up in the basement. He could hear it building up. He could hear the fire. He entered the basement and he could hear the sounds of crackling and popping that indicated to him that there was a significant fire burning somewhere in the basement. At this time, they still did not know where. Heavy smoke was now coming from the basement openings, so that would be the roll-up door and the man door, which, remember, was several steps above the basement floor, and ventilation was needed. Crackling noises and muffled explosions could be heard, and the smoke was coming hotter and darker. The smoke movement suggested the backdraft conditions could be developing within the basement. I've been in a wood refinishing shop that was on fire, and there were lots of muffled explosions, and those were paint cans, and they were going over my head like rockets on the 4th of July. And there was some ducking involved. Just let me leave it at that. So anyway, members from the Special Service Unit, remember this was the truck company that was out of service and had all the truck company gear on it, who they then brought a saw, probably a K-12, to the rear to begin cutting the door. They noted smoke pushing from the joint at the intersection of the front wall. So in the that would be the Bravo Charlie corner, they could see smoke coming out. I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
And at the sidewalk, so along that wall. So they say front wall, but I think they must mean the beta, the
No,
Bravo side.
it was the alpha side.
Okay, so they must have walked all the way down then
Yeah.
and around. So crew members who crawled into the basement after cutting the bottom panel of the roll-up door encountered elevated temperatures when they attempted to stand up inside. At 0618, the deputy again advised the chief of the need for ventilation and reported that he was reassigning the attack crew to take out the basement windows on the Morgan Street side of the building. So these would be on the Bravo side.
That's the Bravo.
So
Yeah.
there's a series of windows, I think 5 along that side. So the first 4 windows, so from the Charlie Bravo corner, the first 4 windows heading towards the Alpha side opened into the boiler room. So that's that separate room that had been built inside for the boilers. And when they were broken, only a moderate amount of smoke was released. The 5th window, so closest to the Alpha Bravo corner, was the only one that opened into the main part of the basement. And when it was broken, a heavy volume of hot black smoke was released. I'm not sure they were aware of the divisions within the building. Were they at that time, do you think?
No, that I thought that was interesting because here's a building that's 150 feet from the fire station that's been there for 100 plus years, and talking to the members is what did you know about the interior of the building? Nobody had a clue.
But a fire officer observing the results of opening those windows could have come to some conclusions about divisions in the basement, I think,
I
in
think they were
hindsight.
putting it together. The deputy who was back there was a salty guy with a lot of time, and he was putting it together, but it was one of those, okay, let's let's figure out what's going on here cases.
Yeah. Hard to do in real time when stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So at the front of the building, in other words, the Alpha side, at this time, the volume of smoke was also increasing, but it was still relatively light in color and lazy in movement, which meant it wasn't particularly hot. There's no indication of visible fire. The Pioneer Chief discussed the need for vertical ventilation with the Hilltop Chief and instead requested that Hilltop's member break out additional windows on the second floor on the front and on the sides of the building now. Hilltop members split into 2 crews and positioned ground ladders on the front and side. So which side would this be, Gordon? The Delta side or the Bravo side?
The Alpha and the Bravo. Yeah.
Okay. So on Morgan Street and along the main road there, Brecken. Side of the building to accomplish. Electrical power lines required extra caution in the positioning of the ground ladders. So I guess power hadn't been disconnected at this point.
Right. Yeah.
The crew members from Hilltop Truck 33, who include the 4 firefighters who perished in this fire, had advanced their line in through that front door on the Alpha side, and were in that open area. So it was a large open floor near the top of the basement stairs. So they're pretty much the middle of the floor. The Pioneer Assistant Chief went outside to obtain a key to the stairway door from the business owner. So I guess earlier when they went to unlock doors, that's not one they unlocked. He returned and unlocked the door, but it was hot to the touch and smoke was issuing from under and around it. So essentially that was a potential chimney for a basement fire.
Yeah. Yeah. If they had opened that door, they would have been opening the top of the chimney.
Right. It was hot to the touch and the smoke was issuing from underneath the door and from around the door. He had directed that crew to hold their position in that open area in the middle of the ground floor and to look out for vertical extension of the fire, presumably through the stair bulkhead, while he went outside to confer with the fire chief. With the heavy volume of smoke that was coming from the basement window, that one window near the Alpha Bravo corner, the Chief 5 determined that the best direction of attack would probably be via the basement stairs. So the guys at the back are making an attack through available doors, and the guys at the front are considering making an attack down the basement stairs. So I think that goes to your comment about communications between the Alpha and the Charlie side of the building.
Yeah, yeah. There was no effective coordination between what was going on, front and back, which equals upstairs, downstairs.
Yeah, it's almost like they were fighting fire in two different buildings.
Yeah,
So the guys at the front, which was the Tower 33, who were the four of them stationed at the top of the stair bulkhead, the chiefs were considering using that crew to advance down the stairs into the basement and using a positive pressure fan to keep the stairs clear. So their thinking was that they were going to pressurize the ground floor to keep the stairs clear, even though they'd taken out a lot of windows on the upper floor. So I'm
yeah.
not
That
sure how
wasn't
that
going
was.
to work.
Yeah.
That I can tell you for sure that wouldn't have worked.
But PPV was really a pretty hot topic in the early 90s.
It
Yeah,
was.
A lot of people experimenting with it. I don't think too many fire departments really had a handle on how and where and when to use it.
yeah,
So interesting they considered it, and interesting they shared that with you when you did the investigation. Anyway, they want to keep the stairs clear, push the smoke and heat out through the basement windows and the overhead door. One of the crew members was sent to determine the location of the stairs and the ability to advance a line by that route. So somebody else, a fifth person, was sent to go inside.
Yeah, I sold a lot of PPV fans in the 90s.
yeah,
And by the size of the hoses and stuff like that, it sounds like Breckenridge and Hilltop and stuff were fairly aggressive into fire, equipment and behavior and stuff. So that's probably where hey, let's use that new fan
yeah,
to see if we can pressurize the stairway, which of course, because they'd ventilated, they couldn't. But at about 6:20 hours, the Eureka rescue crew and the members who had completed the supply line for Engine 50 walked up to the rear of the building and encountered that SS-115, so the crew from the truck company that didn't have an aerial, still attempting to cut through the rear door. I can hear that K-12 saw going now. Some of the members began to assist in cutting the door, while others obtained an 1 3/4 attack line from Engine 50. The attack line was advanced under the door, and fire was immediately visible along the wall to the left of the doorway and toward the corner where the finishing room was located. The line was advanced into the basement as the crew attempted to knock down visible fire. At approximately 6:23 hours, this was the first sign of visible fire and the first application of water on the fire. How unfortunate that even though they went in with big lines to fight a commercial fire, the line that found the fire was a smaller line, 1 3/4 inches. The fire conditions at this point suggest the fire had finally broken out of the finishing room, possibly due to failure of its enclosure walls. The Eureka members worked their way into the basement but could not knock down the heavy volume of fire in the far corner with the flow from their 1 3/4 line. The Eureka chief directed the crew to back out and sent other members to obtain a large line and a portable master stream to place it in the doorway. And that master stream shows up in one of the pictures, actually. 2 attempts to contact the Pioneer Fire Chief by radio were unsuccessful. The floor collapsed. So at the front door, the assistant chief was coming out as he passed the firefighter who was entering to locate the stairs. Remember, we just talked about they'd sent a guy in to find the stairs so they could advance that line down. The firefighter took one step inside the front door and began to sink as the floor began to collapse into the basement. He was pulled to safety by the assistant chief as the floor dropped away. We had an incident like that. I was told of it. I wasn't there, in Ponoka at a residential fire with lightweight trusses. And the guys were just in the front vestibule about to go into the house to perform a search and find the fire or whatever. And they fell in, and the guy standing in the doorway pulled them out. In an instant, the interior erupted in a rush of smoke, followed by a ball of fire, blowing out the doorway and shattering the ground floor front windows. The eruption pushed the firefighters into the street and knocked several others off their feet. As they looked back towards the doorway, they could see the 2-inch hose line rupture as it was enveloped by fire. Heavy fire continued to pour from the basement and out through the front openings at street level. As the floor collapsed, there was only enough time for someone to shout out, "Get them out!" over the radio. There was no contact with the 4 Truck 33 crew members. Some members realized immediately that the firefighters could be trapped inside, and additional hose lines were quickly advanced and operated into the doorway, but they could not suppress the fire. There was no possibility to advance the lines into the building. The floor was completely gone across the entire front of the building. There was no rear exit on the first floor, so the only way to the Truck 33 members would have gotten out of the building would have been to go down the stairs and out the door at the rear of the basement. There was some initial confusion over the number of members who were missing and their specific identities. Hilltop members knew that they had 4 crew members inside, but only 3 were immediately identified. The identity of the 4th member had to be determined by reconstructing who had seen whom on the truck and donning SCBA prior to entry into the building. Pioneer members had been in and out of the buildings, and there was no system in place to rapidly determine who had responded or where they were on the incident scene at the time of collapse. A little bit like Charleston, they really didn't know who was there because everybody went, it's a big fire.
Yeah.
Is there no accountability system in place, Gordon, that you're aware
No,
of?
accountability hadn't been invented yet.
Didn't have tags or something.
Nothing.
When I started, we had you know the ear tags for cows.
Yeah.
Cow tags we used.
with our name written on them, and we had them on the back of our helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had them at that time.
Yep. The Pioneer officers had to account all their members to confirm that they were all out of the building. The word spread rapidly that at least 3 members were missing and were believed to have fallen into the basement inferno. It was approximately 30 minutes before the actual number and their identities were confirmed. While the situation was obvious to everyone at the front of the building, the crews operating at the side and the rear were unaware of the critical situation for several minutes. While the ground shook and the building erupted in flames at the front, the only change that was evident in the other areas was a brief push of smoke, followed by a significant increase in smoke and heat. The Eureka crew that was backing out with the 1 3/4 line was still in the basement, and its members were unaware of the collapse. The members who were working on the roll-up door now had hot, heavy black smoke coming out through their opening. Wow.
What a nightmare.
Yep.
Yeah, it certainly was. The guys who were inside just had nowhere to go. If you can visualize the building, the front entrance was more or less in the middle of the Alpha side. And from the door sill, 10 feet into the building, the floor was gone from one side to the other.
So I was reading in your notes and your investigation, and the floor beams, the joists that were holding that up, were fabricated out of 1/8-inch steel sheet. That's all that was holding that floor up.
Yeah.
So that
I couldn't
span went.
I couldn't believe it when I got down there and looked at it. I said, how could this structure have been holding up the floor? Completely exposed steel, very light steel, probably locally fabricated.
It was at its rated load 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
Without a fire or firefighters.
Yeah.
And not unprotected, no fire protection whatsoever on those.
Yeah.
Okay, the rescue attempts, yep. An estimated 10 minutes elapsed before it was known to the crews at the rear that a collapse had occurred and that members were believed to have fallen into the basement. The Eureka crew organized an entry team to attempt a rescue while the portable deluge was used to attack the fire in the basement. The entry team advanced the hose line through the basement and to the point where they encountered collapsed steel and concrete, but could find no sign of the missing members. Based on the report that the Hilltop crew had last been seen near the top of the stairs, They advanced the line up to the stairway landing. A member worked his way to the top of the stairs and reached out to search for victims, but the visibility was almost zero and there was no sign of the missing crew. 2 more rescue attempts were made by the Eureka crew and 1 by the Pioneer crew, in each case looking for the missing members in the basement rubble from the top of the stairs. The upper floors of the building were becoming heavily involved in fire, and the members could feel the vibrations as sections of the upper floor and the roof collapsed. A final attempt was made more than an hour after the floor collapse occurred and involved our Eureka rescue team using lifelines. From the top of the stairway, 2 members worked their way out to the edge of the collapse area and looked for signs of the missing members, but still found no sign of them. To reach the stairs, they had to wade through water above the tops of their boots, feeling their way to avoid obstructions. As they worked their way out, they discovered the stripper solvent tanks that were overflowing into the flooded basement and several drums that were overturned or ruptured. The entire crew had to be decontaminated in the freezing temperatures and were then transported back to their station. After this attempt, all rescue efforts were suspended until the fire could be brought under control. After the collapse, the upper floors of the fire building were rapidly involved in fire. The ramp opening allowed the fire to fully involve the storage area on the second floor and the wood roof structure. Most of the first floor was also consumed by flames. Exposure protection soon became critical, particularly to the wood frame residents on side 4 or the Delta side. Additional mutual aid companies were summoned and master streams were placed into operation to contain the fire. To supply the master streams, large diameter hose lines were stretched to the riverfront where a pumper was placed to draft and to hydrants several blocks away. Water was obtained from the Tarentum water system and from a private steel plant within the limits of Breckenridge. As the building was consumed, some of the exterior brick walls began to fail, bringing down the electrical power lines that ran along the front and side of the structure. The resulting power failure disabled the major pumps supplying the Breckenridge water system, and more mutual aid companies had to be called to further supplement the water supply. A tanker shuttle was also used to supplement the water supply for a short period of time. The fire consumed the entire roof and second floor levels, continuing to expose neighboring structures until mid-morning. As the structure collapsed inward, elevated master streams were able to bring the flames under control. In the crowded area where the fire occurred, there was a significant risk of fire spread to other structures around the burning structure, and most of the fire suppression effort was directed to exposure protection. So your bad problem got really worse when all of a sudden you had no fire pumps to give you water anymore.
Oh, yeah. Talk about critical infrastructure protection, right? The water system main pumps quit, and obviously the backups may not have been sufficient, or they didn't have, or who knows.
Yeah, in a crowded neighborhood with a lot of old buildings.
I had a major industrial fire, as I mentioned earlier, in a 500,000 square foot rubber extrusion factory, and the water supply in that area was horrible. We relayed water 5 blocks from a major main. Took 3 pumpers to do it, and even those Doug's, just read a few words about having to establish this water supply and having to supplement it with another water supply and so forth. You don't do that stuff in 5 minutes. It takes a major effort. It takes major hose. It takes planning. It takes the right people. I mean, you don't relay water easily.
No.
Everybody's got to be coordinated. You need a radio channel to coordinate all that kind of stuff. And to get it all flowing properly. And one guy does something a little different on the end, like opens a line or shuts down a master stream, and the whole system can choke up. So there's not a lot of words there, but boy, there was a lot of action going on.
And it takes time for all those mutual aid companies to get there and set it up too.
Yeah,
So
you
this
were
is
on that Formula Powell one, right, Doug? With lots of water on the edge of town there, a big petrochemical, like some sort of a chemical plant, and only one hydrant.
yeah. So this is hours of work, Gordon? They must have taken hours to set all this up.
Yeah, just an aside, it reminds me of a fire I looked at north of Montreal about 10 years ago, where they had a lumber yard going, and the local fire department had 2,000 feet of 5-inch hose. So they laid out the 2,000 feet of 5-inch hose to a water supply and charged the line back to the scene. But the guy at the scene was a little bit slow opening the valve, so they ended up with 2,000 feet of 5-inch ice.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, yeah. I know Saskatoon had a big fire at a big warehouse or production facility not far from the fire hall in the wintertime, and overhaul took a long time, and they ended up with a whole bunch of ice hose. And I remember seeing them pulling the hose back to the fire station. It was only a couple blocks away, so they were dragging it back with 4-wheel drive trucks to take it in piece by piece and thaw it in the fire station.
Yeah. At least they probably got some water out of it at some stage. This one,
Yeah, at some point.
never
Yeah.
got any water out of it.
Oh wow.
So lest we forget, while all this stuff is going on, buildings falling down, power lines coming down, pumps shutting off, more mutual aid being called, more hose being laid out, drafting sites found at the river, relays set up, hose all over the place, pumping uphill too, so you need to know what you're doing. Well, all this is going on. There's 4 guys missing,
Yeah.
and they're inside that building, and nobody knows where they are. So finally, I guess after the fire is under control or contained, they had made that last rescue attempt where the guys were wading through the solvents and so forth. And they finally recognized at that point that there really was no hope of finding the missing firefighters alive. So you're going from a rescue to a recovery situation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that type of transition was recognized in those words that we're used to now, but that's what was going on.
Yeah.
And you can only imagine what was going on in the firefighters' heads. These are brothers, fathers, sons, neighbors. They all knew each other. So they had either, the firefighters that were missing, they'd either fallen into the roaring inferno of the basement, or they were still somewhere on part of the first floor that remained standing. Remember, in the back half of the building.
Yeah, it turned out that
Actually, I think they were
that they stayed up on part of the first floor that stayed in place.
Yeah, I think Gordon, I remember from reading this that there were 5 bays, right? And they ran like the first bay, the second bay, the third bay, the fourth bay, running from the Alpha back through to the Charlie
Yeah.
side. And it's the bay 1 that dropped, and the other 4 bays were still standing, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
So just to give people a picture, there was still quite a bit of the first floor still there, but you couldn't get to it.
Yeah.
Only through the basement stairs, and the basement was untenable. So basically, they were on an island. You couldn't get to them. So, but the entire building had been heavily involved in fire because the second floor and the roof had collapsed into the interior. So you've just got these foot wide or 18-inch wide masonry walls standing around this smoking hole, basically. The entire building had been heavily involved in fire for more than 2 hours. So heavy equipment was needed to move rubble in order to search for the bodies. So the Allegheny County Fire Marshal assumed responsibility for the investigation at this point. There were probably a couple triggers for that. And the county public works equipment was brought in to move the debris. They used a gradall to pull out portions of the front wall. So you guys remember these gradalls? There's a telescoping boom with this wide ditch bucket on the end on a turret, and they use them mostly for, cutting nice smooth ditches. And there is an aerial. Yeah. And so they parked this thing right at the front of the building.
I'll throw a picture of a gradall in the
There is
website
one there is one shown in one of the aerial photos that I don't know how you got that photo because you didn't have drones in those days, but there is an aerial photo of the gradall in position. So I don't know how you did that.
I
Gordon,
think
building next door or something.
No, I think that came from a local little TV station or newspaper that sent somebody up with a plane. I think you got it from them.
Okay.
One of the things that's
So there, it does show there.
one of the things that's interesting there is Allegheny County Public Works. They were the Public Works Department, but almost all of the employees were volunteer firefighters, and the Public Works Department was kind of a predecessor to a USAR team. They had all kinds of heavy rescue capability in public works.
Well, they had to do ditch and sewer rescue, right?
Right.
Standby.
Yeah, but they routinely responded to fires and got involved doing, movement of heavy stuff at fire scenes.
Yeah, out here, I had problems with several municipalities I worked for. They didn't want to let public works employees be on the fire department because they didn't want to lose them to go fires when they were, they asked other companies to let their people volunteer or be part-time firefighters, but the municipalities didn't want to have that impedance.
Yeah.
It actually was the case here in Lacombe initially, but it's changed completely now. They have several firefighters that work for the city, and it goes hand in hand, like you say.
Yeah.
So the Allegheny County Fire Marshal brought in, was that because of the deaths, or was that because of responsibility for handing it off to an impartial investigator? Do you know
They,
what was the
they're
truth
the
there?
investigative agency there. They're responsible for fire investigations.
Okay, that's probably a good thing with all those fire companies.
Yeah.
Anyway, this Gradall was brought in and parked on the Alpha side and was pulling out portions of the front wall that were still standing. And they were also used to dig out the rubble because there was a lot of rubble sitting on top of that first floor. Because, like I said, the second floor and the roof had collapsed in on the building, was sitting on top of the floor. You can only imagine the stress that was on the remaining structure underneath of that floor. It must have been incredible. And they're in the basement working on a fire when this thing's over their head. Wow. Anyway, they dug that out. It was only at this point that an assessment of the extent of the floor collapse could have been made, and it could be seen that only the very front portion, in other words, the first of 5 bays, had fallen into the basement. The bodies of the 4 firefighters were located about 6 hours after the collapse occurred. All 4 bodies were found together, approximately 35 feet inside the front door, basically in the same area where they had last been in contact with the assistant chief, who had told them to stay there until he got back to them. The floor in this area had not collapsed, but the bodies were almost covered by debris that had fallen as the building burned, the second floor of the roof. One of the firefighters still held the nozzle in his hand for the line that had burned through, and another had an axe. Another had a portable radio, and there was a hand light found with the bodies.
Yeah,
It appears that the 4.
I found some of that
Go
stuff
ahead.
the next day. After the bodies had been recovered, I was in there the next day and found the nozzle and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, that was fun. It appears that the 4 had been immediately overwhelmed when the fire erupted from the basement. So the floor collapsed, put pressure in down there, and the fire came up through. And remember, I said earlier that it blew out the front windows, and there was a ball of flame and smoke that came out after it. So that's what they saw from the street. So all that would have been all across that first floor inside. They would have been killed virtually instantly.
Yeah, I don't think they moved 2 feet.
Yeah. So most of their PPE had been destroyed. An examination of recovered components of that PPE and an autopsy reports indicated that all 4 were wearing their full PPE and were breathing on their SCBAs when they were overcome. There was no indication of any inhalation of smoke or superheated gases. So they died from thermal insult is what killed them.
Yeah.
Because at that time the building had not collapsed on top of them. That must have been pretty sobering reading those coroner reports.
Yeah, and finding the remnants of their equipment right where they had been too. As I said, when I got there, a couple of us went in. This was 24 hours later, and and recovered some of the equipment that they had, pieces of SCBAs and bits of protective clothing.
So as an example of the degree of destruction, all that remained of one SCBA cylinder was a blob of melted aluminum still attached to the steel cylinder valve. Now this is 1991, so older style pack. Glass fiber reinforcement filaments maintained the shape of the cylinder, but there was no aluminum inside of it. Although two of the SCBAs had pass units, so those would not have been integrated. They'd been the ones you wear on your belt or on the straps. There had been no pass alarm sounds noted by anyone outside during the rescue attempts. The only sound that had been heard by one member who reported hearing a low pressure alarm bell on an SCBA a few minutes after the collapse. So probably the high
Yeah.
pressure hose had burned off or something and the tank vented it.
Yeah, I think
That
so.
would be my assumption on that.
Yeah, but again, it shows that they were fairly progressive in the equipment and everything, because in 91 and they had fiberglass or carbon wrapped aluminum cylinder SCBA, which many departments were running
Yeah.
just steel still.
Yeah, the steel, aluminum, glass wrapped, Kevlar wrapped, carbon wrapped.
Yeah,
That's the
the
sequence of
progression. Yeah,
evolution there.
as we talked about before, the floors and the roof of the fire building were supported by a frame of unprotected steel members. The sidewalls of the building were load-bearing, as indicated by pilasters that were visible on the Morgan Street side of the building to support it. The steel beams spanned the width of the building at 4 locations, dividing the structure into 5 bays, as Denny mentioned, about 15 feet deep. The massive roof girders, 30 by 12, appear to have been unsupported across the entire 65-foot width of the building. The roof girder were steel I-beam sections fabricated from plate and angle components that were riveted to form desired shapes, reflecting the structural steel technology of the period. The wood roof imposed a lighter load than the combination of cars and concrete on the floors, making a broad span feasible. The floors were supported by steel beams and columns. The beams and columns were arranged in 4 major support assemblies spanning the width of the building at 15-foot intervals. The outer span beams were considerably smaller than the middle span beams, due to the shorter span and reduced load. The outer ends of the beams were solidly bricked into the side walls, providing a rigid anchorage at each end, and rigidly connected to the intermediate columns with bolts and brackets. The majority of the structural steel, though, was exposed. The only evidence of any fire-resistant protection for the steel frame was on the beams supporting the ground floor and provided an extra measure of fire resistance for these particular members only. The webs of those protected members have been encased in concrete, leaving the flanges and column connectors exposed. The concrete encasement appears to have been done after the original construction, but the reason not being known. There were no provisions to anchor the concrete to the steel, and the encasement on the first support fell off at some point in the structural collapse. The columns and the remainder of the beams were unprotected, although some were boxed in by the construction of interior partition walls. The most critical construction detail was the construction of the floor assemblies. These were supported by unprotected steel joists, spaced approximately 12 inches centers. The joists spanned the distance between the beams and between the beams and the front and rear walls. They were lightweight steel joists that were extremely vulnerable to heat of a fire. The anchorages of some of the joists at the front of the building were severely corroded, particularly in the area under the door leading to the vehicle ramp. Pennsylvania, moisture, vehicles. These particular joists were so severely corroded that they may not have been able to support a routine load. The concrete floor slab was only 2 1/4 inches thick, with approximately 3/8 inch thick topping of tile or terrazzo floor. The only reinforcing in the concrete appears to be a steel mesh that was used to support the bottom of the slab when it was poured.
The structural collapse. The primary structural collapse was caused by the failure of steel joists supporting the floor slab above the finishing room. All of the joists between the front wall and the first set of support beams failed and dropped the concrete slab into the basement. Examination of the joists found in the rubble indicates that all were severely warped and twisted from heat exposure. The slab broke near the midpoint of the span, and some sections were left hanging vertically from the beams. This created an opening directly over the fire, extending 15 feet in from the front for the full width of the building. The middle column supporting the first set of beams was also buckled, although this appears to have been a secondary failure. The buckling of this column caused a secondary slab failure between the first and second sets of beams. The slab in the second base sloped down toward the opening with a low point at the center column, but did not drop into the basement. The remainder of the ground floor was not compromised. The entire roof and most of the second floor collapsed into the rubble during the fire. Structural steel loses most of its strength between 10,000 and 14,000 degrees
1,000 or
Fahrenheit.
1,400.
I
Yeah.
put the commas in the wrong spot there.
Yeah.
1,000, okay. 1,000 and 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and the endurance of a particular member is directly related to its mass, the load on the member, and the temperature of the fire environment. The method of attachment of the joist is also very significant. Unrestrained members tend to elongate, while rigidly restrained members will warp or twist. The steel joists above the finishing room were directly exposed to fire for a long period of time. The hot floor condition was noticed by the first firefighters entering the building approximately 35 minutes before the collapse occurred, and it is possible the fire had been burning in the finishing room for an extended period of time before being discovered. The individual joists were probably heated to the point of failure well before the collapse occurred, probably before the fire department arrived. They did not collapse immediately because they were supported by the rigidity of the combined joist and slab assembly and the manner of support at the basement wall. The failure may have been initiated by one of several causes. The concrete slab may have been heated enough to fracture from internal stresses, or a minor backdraft in the basement could have caused it to lift slightly and then drop back. The corroded joist ends may have failed first, resulting in a domino effect collapse across the front of the structure, or the first movement of the buckling column could have fractured the slab and triggered a total failure of the floor section. Any of these sources could have initiated the failure. The critical point is that the failure could have occurred at any time before or after the arrival of the fire department.
Interesting thing there, and I'll put the drawings on our social media feed, but I don't know that the firefighters ever got to the front of the building from the basement. They never, the fire extended out of the area where it started. They never got to where the collapse
No,
was.
not
They never got any water on it.
until the fire was under control.
Yep. Okay, this has been a long story, but it's good to understand the details of what happened and unprotected steel. Like you say, know your district, right? Like you said before, Denny, these guys were right across the street, but had maybe not been in the building. Effective pre-fire planning, lessons learned. Effective pre-fire planning should cover all major structures in the community, even those that appear to be of fire-resistive construction. The critical details of constructions that made this structure vulnerable to collapse should be recognizable to individuals who had studied the hazards of building construction. The fact that unprotected steel construction is extremely vulnerable to rapid failure under fire exposure should be clearly understood by all firefighters. The recognition of this type of construction is more difficult while a fire is in progress than during an inspection or pre-planning visits. For code purposes, this building would have been classified as unprotected, non-combustible. It had no fire resistance and should have been considered vulnerable to collapse from any significant fire exposure. It had automobiles in it, but really automobiles are fairly light compared to other loads. Not at this time, but before.
Gordon, do you think that if a structural engineer had inspected the basement, that he would have been able to observe the joist corrosion under the overhead door on the first floor there? Or was that buried
No, I
solidly
think
in
if
the
somebody
basement and
had
not noticeable?
had gone there to do a structural assessment of the building and had gone to that area, they would have seen it.
Pre-fire.
But I don't think that ever happened.
I mean,
probably 50 or
Yeah.
100 years of water coming in the bottom of that door.
Well, think of the condos in Florida and this 25-year inspection requirement that they have in Florida or in Miami. I'm not sure where the rule comes from, but the building that collapsed about 3 or 4 years ago had failed its 25-year inspection, and they couldn't come together with how to fix it and do condo boards and everything. But I mean, I've never
So
heard
it
of this
fell down
25-year
Yeah, that's a
inspection thing.
Florida thing as a result of bad experience.
Sure, seawater, salt air, and everything, and construction and stuff. Same with the earthquake a couple of years ago in Turkey or Syria, and I mean the problem is the buildings, they had new earthquake proof buildings built, and the newer buildings failed more than the older buildings because they're saying they weren't built correctly and stuff like that, right?
So I'm laughing at Gordon's terminology, bad experience. Isn't everything we do in the fire
Yeah, we're
department the result
specialists
of
in bad
bad experience?
experience.
Isn't that how we've learned for years?
Yeah, we are. You're right.
It's
The
funny, but
of
it is.
course, I mean, the extremely limited access and exit conditions also should have been noted in any pre-fire planning. The only access to the ground floor was at the front. The only access to the basement was at the rear. Access to the second floor was limited to the ramp. The firefighters on the ground floor had no alternate exit path. These are critical factors that should be incorporated into plans that can be used by the incident commander to make critical strategic decisions at a fire. The fact that the building was so close to the fire station was one of the major structures in the community. Several members were familiar with it in a general sense. Unfortunately, had not been pre-planned and evaluated in a manner that identified its inherent weaknesses. This is a case where working for perceptions resulted in a false sense of security. The investigation actually revealed that the fire building had several possible violations of the fire prevention code that had been adopted by the Borough of Breckenridge in 1981, 10 years earlier. The enforcing authority for this code would have been the borough, but it's not clear if the responsibility had been delegated to the fire department, either formally or informally. So again, you get the government arms pointing at each other.
So there was one of the things identified was a need for standard operating procedures for incident management, particularly great need in areas where there are numerous autonomous fire companies. It seems obvious now. We certainly talk about it a lot, but I've been a mutual aid coordinator for 15 years, I guess, in different jurisdictions. And even then, trying to get a meeting of the minds on just the language that you're going to use, or whether you're going to, who gets to call their station, Station 51, or whatever the case may be, is sometimes a challenge. And it's it's a sad fact, but you need to have incidents like this to show people. And you got to strike while the iron is hot because the next generation doesn't seem to learn these
Yeah,
lessons.
particularly in this case, that there was a
So it
lot
says,
of
well, some,
friendly rivalry between companies. So there was no force pulling everybody together to all work the same. Everybody was fiercely independent.
yeah. So I mean, like I said, I do, investigations and consulting on fire services, municipal fire services here, and I'm telling you, there's areas where every fire department, boy, you're not telling me what to do, and you know, and they're small departments, and they don't understand that they would be so much more, much greater than the sum if they worked together. However,
Hey, at
the
least at
fear
least
of
these
loss of
guys called
incident.
each other. There's at least they called for help and called each other. There's lots
Yeah,
of places that they think the world ends at their border, and there's no more fire departments that way. We're it.
yeah. Yeah, so well, some of the basic elements of an incident management system, as we call it now, it would have been
Yeah,
called incident command back in those days. Brunacini used that term quite a lot. Was employed at this incident. There was not a clearly defined and documented system to develop a strategic plan let alone an incident action plan, and to effectively manage resources, particularly those where several different companies were involved in the operation. I don't know, Gordon, but at this one here, this must have been one of the bigger mutual aid activations that they had
Yeah,
seen in
but
recent memory, I would think.
they have their share of fires in Allegheny County. This was a memorable one, but it's an area that has fires.
Right. So an area that encompasses numerous autonomous jurisdictional units has a particular need for standard operating procedures to manage incidents. I mean, if Phoenix and the area can do it, surely you would think that smaller departments could do it. The incident management system must be applied in a consistent manner to effectively integrate the efforts of mutual aid companies and particularly to provide for operational safety. It's all about the guys at the end of the day, and it's about providing your service. Fireground information must be effectively communicated and processed to formulate a risk assessment and attack plan. So that was particularly noted, I think, by you in the report that wasn't
Yeah,
happening.
the incident commander had no idea what was going on inside the building. He was positioned at the front. He was distracted by everything that was going on with water supply. And there was no effective communication from the crews in the rear and the lower part of the building with what was going on the ground floor. So there were probably 3 different operations going on, and nobody was conducting the orchestra.
So no sectoring.
Was he
Oh,
outside
he was
or in a
outside.
vehicle?
Yeah.
Standing there, yeah, and probably didn't have
No,
a
no,
dedicated assistant or anything.
he was pretty much preoccupied with the hose situation.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And as we'll find out a little bit further down here, they were essentially operating this entire
Yeah.
fire on a single frequency.
Yeah,
Done
and
that.
if
Wasn't a lot of fun.
you don't sector it
Yeah.
off, then it's
And
a
the
nightmare.
Hilltop guys were talking to the
Yeah.
Hilltop guys.
Been
The
there.
Pioneer guys were talking to the Pioneer guys. The Eureka guys were talking to the Eureka guys. But there wasn't a whole lot.
We're still doing that in Nova Scotia.
Sorry?
Mutual aid. Everybody's on their own channel at mutual aid calls.
Yeah. Alberta has spent a ton of money on a new radio system so that it does have, everybody has the same channels on the radios and they can have their own. The problem is the hardware cost is expensive. So a lot of the small places don't have it yet because they have to buy new radios at $3,000 a crack. But at least there is a system in place, and we're working towards the bigger centers all have them already. And the little centers are buying a few so they can, at least have command on the right channel. But we do have a common system, similar to the one Nova Scotia was going to do years ago, got shot down.
Nova Scotia has a common system funded by the province, almost 40 years in existence. And the way the fire departments use them here is they walk around with 2 radios. One they do all their communicating on, and the other one they use to talk to dispatch.
Okay, Manitoba does that.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that's not good either. Okay, we're going on and on. It's good discussion.
Yeah. Anyway, this fire was a particular example of a situation where the nature and extent of the fire was not clearly identified as it was ongoing, and the incident commander had great difficulty developing a plan to deal with the situation. Units were on the scene for over 30 minutes with an obvious working fire somewhere in the building before any water was even applied to the fire. 30 minutes. Now remember, there were some frozen hydrants also. While several clues were present to suggest the location and growing magnitude of the fire, the information did not come back to the incident commander in a manner that supported an effective risk assessment or the development of an operational plan. So these same factors have been identified in several previous incidents that resulted in multiple firefighter deaths. So we're just repeating history here. In most of these cases, crews were working in areas where conditions appeared to be routine and non-threatening, unaware of critical factors that were occurring around them, sometimes above
Yeah.
them, sometimes below them, I guess, Gordon? Analysis of an incident can make critical observations and factors obvious after the fact, right? In this incident, several factors were noted by different individuals: hot floors, increasing smoke and heat in the basement, smoke pushing out between the wall and the sidewalk, cracking and popping noises, for examples. The 20-minute rule is often used as a guideline in making an assessment of structural
Yeah.
conditions. Now, you wrote this in 91, right? I don't know if this 20-minute rule is a hot topic anymore. But the rules based on the body of experience at that time that suggested that ordinary construction, which is a non-fire resistive building, should be considered vulnerable to structural collapse after 20 minutes of fire involvement. The rule is based on generalized experience of the fire service and has many exceptions. In the case of unprotected steel construction, this could be an overly generous time allowance. Well, it could be quite conservative, extremely conservative for fire resistive construction, like mass concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, we talked about this already a little bit. The effective communication system is an essential tool of a modern fire department. The inadequacies of the existing communication systems are evident in this analysis of this incident. Several communities in this part of Allegheny County share common primary radio frequencies. Both Tarentum and Harrison dispatch bases and several other communities use one frequency to dispatch volunteer fire and ambulance companies. The same frequency is used for dispatch tones, communication between individual units and the dispatcher, communications between incident command and the dispatcher, and on-scene tactical communication. It is not uncommon for a base station to override on-scene communications at an incident. Used to have that here in the county too, and you'd have base stations in the stations calling their units and dispatch and the incident command and everybody. And I mean, the need for a dispatch channel and a separate channel for the incident is very important. Only one alternate tactical channel is available, but it is not commonly used. In addition, there's no mutual aid or tactical channels that will accommodate units from all four of the intersecting counties. There's an obvious need for designated and coordinated tactical channels that can be used on all the companies responding to the incident. If there's a chance you're going to respond together, you need to have those tactical channels available. In this incident, the Hilltop Interior crew switched to the tactical channel because of heavy traffic on the primary channel. This restricted their ability to communicate with anyone except their own chief officers who were engaged in other activities, and it also cut them off from radio communication with the incident commander or the officer responsible for their assigned areas within the fire. They were also unaware of the reports coming from anyone else at the incident scene that could have given them an indication of the situation a situation was developing. If an evacuation order had been given, they would have had to depend on someone else to repeat it to the order over the tactical channel. In conclusion, it's a sad reality that the 4 volunteer firefighters who died at this incident were operating in full compliance with standard operating procedures and safety guidelines that were adopted by their company. Their performance appears to have been fully reasonable and standard under the circumstances. They were operating together as a crew with a company officer under an assigned command officer. Full PPE, SCBA. They had a radio, lights, tools, and a charged hose lines. These people died by the book, in spite of exemplary efforts of rescue teams who risked their own lives trying to save their fellow firefighters. The lessons that should come from this incident should not reflect negatively anyway on individuals. They are important lessons for the system, the lessons that can help the fire service avoid future tragedies. Chief Routley, that's amazing conclusion that you wrote. Very,
Yeah,
very effective.
I stand by that today. Those guys died doing everything right. It was the incident that was screwed up. I have a lot of respect for Hilltop. They've had me back a couple of times, and I've done a couple of online teleconferences with them on various anniversaries of this fire, like the 10th and the 20th. They've had events, and they had me come and talk to them and share the lessons. So they were a good company.
I mean, some of the basics that we talk about in incident command, and also in Doug's favorite command system. I mean, the big fight about putting somebody locked. The chief needs to be locked in a truck. The chief, the incident commander, the only piece of equipment they have really is the radio. You need to be in a place where the radio is effective in a closed space. And you need to have access to the other company's radios or channels or whatever, right? So that's a basic rule. And the whole, developing a 360 and an overall incident plan, these are all basic command tactics that, maybe because this fire was across the road from the station, maybe that's what threw them off, because you don't have a time to think about it before you
Yeah, I
get
think,
there.
a fire like this, the role of the incident commander involves a lot of problem solving. It's taking the bits and pieces of information and figuring out what's going on, and then developing a plan to fight this fire. But if you're not getting the information, and if you're distracted by things that are going on other than the fire combat itself, then nobody is really calling the shots. And that's what happened.
And I think, you did not get into it in the space of this report, but the whole, what was the span of control? What did the organization look like? To me, it sounds like there wasn't, he didn't appoint other chiefs to take. He did a little bit, because the interior, there was an appointment for
Yeah.
interior on the main floor, but the back and the
Yeah,
water supply and all that
there
stuff.
was no command structure as we would think of it. The officers who were there were the officers of the companies that were operating. So the Breckenridge Pioneer guys were downstairs, and their deputy chief was directing them. But the Eureka guys were also back there, and their chief was directing them. And the Hilltop guys were in the front of the building, and I think it was their deputy chief was coordinating them. But it was a structure by the units that were there, but not by geographic or task assignments.
One of the issues that happened here that always frustrated me when I was more involved in the volunteer service is the chief officers responding on the fire truck, because then they can't really be a chief when they're there, because they're taking up the role of somebody that's on the truck. So if they're responding as the officer of the truck, then they can't just say, okay, you guys are on your own now, I'm going to go see what command needs me to do as a chief. You kind of, if you're responding on the truck, you're not there to do chief duties. And if you're responding to do chief duties, somebody else needs to jump in the front seat of the truck and be the officer of the
Yeah.
That's one of the.
Yep.
It's like the report said, and like we've said, the whole time I was listening to it and reading, the guys didn't do anything wrong that caused them to die. They fought the fire properly, quote unquote. Aside from the takeaways we can take, in my opinion, is know the buildings in your district. And I say all the time, you can't pre-plan every single building. That's true, but a big building like this should be one of the ones you target. A big commercial building that's across the street from your fire station that you look at every time you're there, you should probably know. And keep it in mind that when you're responding, like we've done recently, a whole bunch of quote unquote vacant building fires that collapsed or whatever. When they're vacant buildings or they're commercial buildings that are closed and unoccupied for the night, they could have fires burning for a long time before anybody realizes it and notifies you. So you have to keep in mind that you could be showing up, in this case, probably hours into the fact, that you're not just coming to little fire that you're going to walk in and put out. It could have been burning for a long time and have a really big head start on you. So that's something that, as a responding firefighter, to something that could be like that, you got to keep that in mind.
And one of the things I take away from this is there's so many lessons, and we're still seeing those today. If you read even current firefighter fatalities, some of those lessons are in this exact investigation. And this investigation is how old?
32
Over
years.
30
Yeah.
years ago that this happened. Yeah, 32 years. And frankly, we need to learn from these things. Um, I used to read all the magazines, Firehouse and Fire Engineering and Fire Command. I used to read those magazines cover to cover every single month. When they were electronic, I used to circulate them to all my guys in the fire department, anybody else who wanted access to it. You need to learn. We can't all afford to kill 4 firefighters before we get the lessons. We've got to learn by what other people have done and by really well written reports like this one that point out very clearly what happened and very clearly what went wrong. If we don't learn from these, we're doomed to repeat them. And unfortunately, that's happening. We need to be smart enough to learn and to have that slide deck in your head saying, this reminds me of Breckenridge. I need to look at this. I need to be paying attention to this kind of stuff. You need to have multiple things like that in your head so that you're situationally aware and you go forward more safely. And I've been at situations where I've looked at walls and I says, you know what? I don't like this. Step back and the walls come down. Because not because I've had a lot of walls come down on top of me, but because I've read about it, I've studied about it, and I've learned from other people. You need to do better than me.
Well said, Denis. I mean, that's why we're doing the podcast. You can't train enough for a job that's going to kill you. How can we share that situational awareness? I'm getting more and more feedback of people that listen and go like, yes, this is good. Like, keep doing it if it can get the word out. I mean, Gordon, that's why you come and join us, right? Is how do I relight a fire into this hard work you did for good cause to educate people about a tragic incident? And so that's why we do the podcast.
And
I
that's
couldn't say it
exactly
better.
why they were written, to share that information. And nothing gives me more
Yep.
personal satisfaction than to have somebody come to me and say, I read that report 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and a couple of months ago I had a fire and I was looking at it and it reminded me of Breckenridge, or it reminded me of Seattle, and and that the wheels turned.
Yep. Well, you joined us for the Charleston one, and it's our most popular episode. It's like 150, 200 times it's been listened to. So
I hope
hopefully
so.
it's helping people, right? Thanks so much for joining us again, and we look forward to
Yeah,
possibly doing the Meridian one in for the February. Record that in
sure.
January sometime for February. Thanks everyone for listening to another emergency traffic podcast. We appreciate your interest and hope you find them interesting and informative. Give us a star or a like on the app you use to listen. These mean a lot and they help the algorithms for other people to find us. And you can follow us, of course, on Twitter at Podcast Traffic or our Facebook page, the Emergency Traffic Podcast. And if you have any questions or thoughts or concerns, you can email us at emergencytrafficpodcast@gmail.com. Let's be safe out there.
Take care.
I agree. Let's be safe out there, and this just goes to prove that even when you do everything right, we still have a very dangerous job.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. Thanks, everyone.